My name is Jeff Weir. I'm a user experience designer on the Live Labs team. To give a bit of background here, I've been working on Pivot for over 3 years now. Started work on it in March 2007. And the fact that you're all here is so exciting to me right now. I saw a number of name tags: Florida, Texas, California, Australia, India. This is so cool that you're all here. Just wanted to tell you that. So thanks for coming out. We've given you a lot of stuff for your left side of the brain. I'm going to give you some stuff for the right side of your brain. So we're going to be talking about designing collections, user experiences for Pivot. Now, user experience designer, if you're not familiar with the term, this usually covers interaction design, visual design, usability, a whole bunch of different things. And so we'll be covering some of those topics today. So specifically, we'll be talking about why design matters in this context. We'll be talking about how to make a great collection. That is going to be the bulk of the talk. And then I'll walk through some of the case studies, some of the latest things that we've designed here in the lab. So why design matters? Validating my existence at this company. If we're doing design right, if I'm doing my job right, I'm making things usable, useful, desirable, and feasible. So usable, can people actually use it? Useful, does it do something useful? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? Desirable, do people lust after it? Does it make people want more? Does it make people stick to the experience? And then feasible, can it be built? Is it realistic that people will use this? So let's think about the Pivot sort of thesis statement. This is from the website, getpivot.com. Pivot makes it easier to interact with massive amounts of data in ways that are powerful, informative, and fun. And when you apply the useful, usable, feasible, desirable to powerful, informative, and fun, you get some ideas starting. And I'm going to touch on the powerful, informative, and fun throughout the talk. Thinking about the usage styles of Pivot, you've got two major ones. The first is explore and inspire. So that's sort of the, wow, I never thought about that before. When you lay things out in the histogram view, you expose relationships and inspire new ideas in the data, inspire people to explore and try different views and combinations of filters. This is where people learn new insights and just go down the rabbit hole. The other prime usage type is navigate and act. And this is the very specific, I know what I want, let me get to it. So I know that I want to find the needle in the haystack. Give me everything $100 or less, has 50 views or more, and comes in a nice Louis Vuitton pattern. Or comparing multiple needles with each other, doing a comparison shopping scenario. And ultimately, these let us create and make decisions. So that's just a quick overview of design and what it does for Pivot. But the meat of the topic is how to make a great collection. So what we're going to go over in this section is sort of 5 principles that I like to use when designing a collection. Knowing your goals and your audience, treating your content appropriately, designing for distance. I mean, this is multi-scale experiences, so things can be that big or that big. Automating your production. So there's a lot of images to create. How are you going to do that? And iterating, how to learn as you go along building these. So let's start with knowing your goals and your audience. Now, any design decisions you make should be determined by the goals and your audience. If it's 5 months down the line in the project, someone's like, you know what, it should really be cornflower blue background, and you don't have any goals or audience defined, well, their opinion is as valid as anyone else's. But if you have the goals and audience defined and you know these things, you can argue, no, cornflower blue, wrong color. So examples of goals could be, users should spend 50% more time in this collection than in our website. With this in mind, you might choose certain design decisions according to that. Or users should find insights about age distribution. Maybe that will influence how prominent you make age in the collection design. Or users should have an in-store experience. Well, maybe that translates to, we need to have a very deep zoom experience. Our images have to be super rich. Or we have to use the exact same branding content that we'll be using in our stores to create parity between the website and the stores. And then example audiences. Maybe you are doing a business intelligence application, in which case your users are going to be your coworkers. They'll be using their collection at work. They might be technically savvy. They're familiar with the subject matter, and they are looking for answers. Again, that explore and inspire user type. And with this in mind, you might make certain decisions about what kind of colors, what kind of content goes onto the items in your collection. On the flip side, you might have customers as an audience. Maybe you're in a commercial business. Maybe you're an airline, I don't know. They're going to be using their collections at home. Maybe they are technically savvy, but they don't know about the subject matter, in which case maybe you need more content on the cards. And sorry, I should have defined this up front. I refer to the items in a collection as a card or a trade card. And maybe they need to be sold on what you have to offer, in which case you want to give them the whole brand experience. There are no right or wrong answers that I can tell you about what's right for a collection unless you know the goals and your audience. So with that out of the way, let's talk about treating your content appropriately. Now in Pivot, you have, just like the architecture, or the file architecture, you have your images and you have your data. Data, images. And a good collection is visually rich and has some data in it. So an example of this is maybe a rich photos collection and you have some metadata for it. Or alternatively, you could have some really rich business intelligence data, let's say, and just a couple basic graphics. That's a good collection. But a great collection is going to have a lot of both. Visually rich and data rich. So with that in mind, let's talk about visuals. Now, on the scale here, we've got few elements to many elements. How many elements should be on your trade card? Elements can be images, they can be infographics, they could be text, they could be colors, they could be all kinds of things. And it's a scale, and a lot of this depends on how much content you have to put on, but also who your audience is and what your goals are. In this example, we created a collection for Microsoft's Tech Fest. What we had there was only the titles and the categories for elements in the collection. What was appropriate here was, well, we mapped a color to each category. In this case, UI graphics and media category was blue, and we just threw the title on. This was all we had to work with, but it was appropriate for the collection. Just a note here on using colors mapped to certain values. You don't want to use more than 7 colors, because beyond that, 2 things happen. The first is colors tend to merge together. It's hard to differentiate between light orange and light red after 10 colors, maybe. The other is that your brain can't keep the color mappings in itself for very long. So keep it to a minimum. So that's few elements. Another collection that we had was just a photos collection. Someone did a trip somewhere, met a lot of people, obviously. And in this case, what was appropriate for the trade cards was just the pictures themselves. Sometimes putting nothing on is the right thing to do. Makes sense. You don't want to get the data in the way of consuming the photos. Moving up the scale, we did the actors collection. We have a collection of, I don't know how many thousands of film stars throughout the ages. In this case, it's very similar to the photos collection. It's just that we needed to put the names on because not everyone knows everyone's name. But again, content is king in this place. Up the scale some more. This is when we created the Olympians collection, the Winter Olympians. And what you can see here is this gets more like a common baseball card or a hockey card. You've got a number of elements here. You've got the icon representing what sport it is. You've got the country is stronger, larger than the athlete name because most people know the country rather than the athlete. Down in the bottom right, you've got the medal count. In this case, Eric Pawson won a silver back when they did figure skating outdoors. And then you've got the actual color scheme and the theme of the card. In this case, winter colors are appropriate, very crystalline structure representing winter. It's appropriate. And then getting on the extreme end, we've got the new cars collection. What we've got here is color mapped to the fuel efficiency. We got the price, we got the image of the car, the brand, the docket number. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. And this is where we're starting to push the limit of how much is appropriate to put on the card. Now, it's a scale. But like all scales, there are extremes at either end. On the far left end, you've got no images. And as I mentioned, you can make a collection without imagery if the data is really, really good. I've done this. You can still consume things, but it could be better. On the other extreme, this is my Halloween costume. I was a fork. And this is a lot of data to put on the card. You've got the color scheme for the title. Maybe that represents something. And the border represents something else. And maybe those little tiles up in the right are colors that represent something. And then you have all the text and bar charts and crazy stuff everywhere. It's a bit too much, because when you see it en masse with everything else, you can't differentiate it. And I'll get into how much or what colors to use on a card a bit later. So try to put at least something on your card, even if it's just a square that's blue, red, or yellow, who knows. That's better than nothing. And don't try to put everything on, because that's what the info pane is for. Now, talking about the actual graphic design of a trade card, you're telling a story when you have a collection. And if you know your goals and your audience, that should inform what kind of story you're telling. So in this case, I ripped off the style of the BMW and Mercedes-Benz websites for the elite, classy, futuristic, and refined look. You can see that we've got speed lasers in the back. That makes it look classy and refined, apparently. And if that was the look we were going for, that would be appropriate. But that wasn't the story that we were telling. Instead, we were telling a story mid-2009. We're in the middle of a global economic downturn. Turndown is at a hotel. And people are concerned about the environment, inconvenient truth. So we promoted different things and created a different aesthetic to tell this story. This is why we promoted the fuel label so large. This is why we created sort of an authentic feel with the folder, the dossier. It looks like the dealers actually circled the price for you. Again, it's telling a story. This is the story we wanted to tell. And there's also something else here, and that is the fact that our source imagery for this collection, the cars, were 100 by 100 pixels. That was all we had to work with. So how do you make a deep zoom experience with something that would print to a 1/4 inch if you printed it on a newspaper or a printer? Well, we took the image and we sort of built a collection or an experience around it, which is why we put so much content over here. It's almost like we're saying, hey, look over here. Don't look at that ugly, cruddy picture. So, and that sort of speaks to my design philosophy. Life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. You can do a lot with a little, and you can actually make content where there is no content. A little note about the things like the circles. I mean, does anyone notice anything other than the price? All different circles, exactly. Now, the cars collection has, I don't know the exact number, but I know it's more than 500 cars. I didn't create 500 unique circles, but I did create 15 and randomize them across all the trade cards. Now, this is a little thing. It's just a small little touch. And is everyone going to notice this? No, not at all. But the people who do notice it, who do notice little pieces of attention to detail, emotional attention to detail, they notice it a lot and they appreciate it. They're the people who might see, I don't know if you've seen the milk carton, where you look at the bottom and someone actually took the time to print on it, stop looking at my bottom. Those stories last. And they know that if you put that much attention and detail into that little thing, well, where else did you do that? And that creates a sticky experience that keeps someone in the collection for longer, and is more likely to show it off to a friend. Maybe you can Photoshop yourself into the crowd of a hockey game if you have a hockey sports collection. And you can always zoom into that player and show people, hey, there I am. It's great for Easter eggs. Now that we've talked a bit about the visual design, or the visual element of a collection, let's talk about the data, designing your data. What is the appropriate amount of facet categories to put on the left side of the experience? Now, something I do on the side is make collections. Like I said, I've been doing it for 3 years. It's kind of a hobby. It's kind of an obsession now. It's frightening what I do on the weekend. But how many things to use? In this case, I created a collection of a local personals website. And this is what it looks like when you have one facet category. 7 to 10 gives you a few more options. And then this is all the facet categories. We had 20. Now, as a general rule, you don't want to just give one facet category. For a dating collection like this, men and women, well, maybe for some people that's all you need. But I don't know. I think some people have some preferences. I don't know. And then on the other side, you have 20 facet categories. So if you're looking for someone who's between the ages of 25 and 35, living in Seattle, with brown eyes and brown hair, leans left, goes to church, has children but doesn't want children, you're probably not going to find them in this collection, and you're probably not going to find them in life. But that depends on your audience. So if this was a business intelligence collection for a dating service, maybe you need all 20 facet categories. And like I said, maybe if you're a free-spirited person, all you need is one. So knowing your audience is all you need to determine your facet count. But as a general rule, we go for 7 to 10. Now that said, the info pane is a great spot to fill up tons of content. It's designed to overflow well, so you can throw in all the stuff that didn't fit in the facet categories over into the info pane. Things you can put in here, links to other websites, links to other collections. So what I've got here going on is filters. So I could click on some college, and that would filter me to everyone else in the collection who has some college as a value. Something to note here, if you're doing numbers, For instance, we had a Major League Baseball collection where we have the salaries of everyone. It doesn't really help if you make the salary a filterable link, because you'll filter to everyone who makes $81.32 million, which is usually one person in the collection. Yeah, so fill up the info pane. And another thing to consider in your design is how are people going to filter things? So in a music collection, you have, well, 3 different ways to filter by date. So one way, let's say your audience cares about recent hits, in which case the date filter is most appropriate. It gives you, for instance, yesterday, this week, last week, days, months, specific times. This is really good if you need surgical precision in choosing your dates. Alternatively, maybe it's a collection that's based on the history of music, and it goes way back to 1880, in which case you don't care about months. You just care about broad ranges of years, in which case maybe a numeric range slider is all you need. And then finally, we have text filters. Maybe your audience doesn't know about specific dates, but they do know when they really liked Backstreet Boys, in which case, 90s boy bands. I don't want to see 90 boy bands. God, no. No offense to those who do. And going into the smaller details, formatting your numbers. It's a small thing, but it's an important thing. In this case, we have, let's say, a commercial collection where we're selling stuff. You can use .NET format strings to specify the number of decimals, the comma separator, the $sign. You can also put things after it, for instance, years. You can format the string so that it always says 45 to 25 years. And another thing to remember with your audience is, where are they? If they're in Europe, localize accordingly. Now, I note here that this is not automatic. So if you're going to deploy a collection for European users, you're going to have to put the euro in. It won't automatically detect that for you. And it also won't automatically do the currency conversion for you. So now that we've talked about what's appropriate, let's talk about designing for distance. And this is one of my favorite parts about designing for pivot collections, because it's an interesting design problem that's really, it's pretty fresh within the past 2 years at least. So as I mentioned earlier, things in Pivot can be this big, or that big. Starting with designing for things far away, when things are that big. An opportunity you have is putting some kind of dominant color on the trade card such that it's mapped to a property, so that when you're zoomed out and you see things in histogram, you see interesting comparisons. In this case, we have the 2009 Endangered Species Collection. And here we've mapped colors to mammals, reptiles, birds, fishes, and eels, and more fishes and eels. Another thing that you can do here is that when you get closer, like let's say we've gone into the mammal section, you can add a secondary thing. In this case, I've called it the minor color. What we've got here in the top right of each card is the endangered status. It goes from red in the very top down to black at the bottom. This is another good way of exposing properties of the actual cards and the data inherent. Something I say a lot in designing this stuff is the ability to see versus read. You can just scan the image and see an insight rather than having to read all about it. Now, something that's really important here, as I mentioned with the fork example, major and minor colors, limit them. You put too many colors on, it looks like some kind of freakish Technicolor rainbow jacket. Two is about what you want to do. Now, when things are a bit more up close, you want to think about the aspect ratio. It's sort of pretty obvious that portrait, square, and landscape work pretty well. Square is usually going to give you the most content that you can actually look at when you're focused on an item. We made a collection of XKCD and Penny Arcade webcomics, which have a very tall and wide aspect ratio, and those didn't work too well in the Pivot experience. So try to avoid really tall and really wide aspect ratios. It's not mandatory, but it helps. And another thing that we found in those collections and other collections is that variable aspect ratios, if you care about clean lines, they break up the clean lines. So here's an example. When you load an item or a collection in Pivot, it'll take the first item in the top left corner. It'll then create a grid based on that item and its aspect ratio. And then it will fill that grid with the remaining items in the collection, leaving you with this. If you don't like that, what you can do is put those items into a trade card that has the same aspect ratio, and that's how you can get a nice, clean-looking collection. Again, it depends who your audience is, if they'll care about this or not. Now, the really it's totally fun. Designing for deep zoom. There are sort of three major things to think about when designing for deep zoom. One is designing for rich content. So this example, I don't know who knows the breed of this dog. It's the Papillon. It's beautiful. And the reason they call it Papillon is French for butterfly, and you can see the butterfly pattern in the face. I bet you weren't going to learn that today. But on top of that, this is a deep zoom image, and so I can zoom into the eye and see the reflection of the photographer in the eye. It's like an episode of CSI. But what if you don't have super deep zoom rich imagery? What if you have the 100 by 100 pixels of cars? Well, my design philosophy is life gives you potatoes, you make potato salad. So you take that low-res image and you create rich adornments. You can still make deep zoom experiences if you don't have deep zoom source imagery. In this example, what I did was I went up to Cal Anderson Park up in Capitol Hill in Seattle and just took a photograph of the playing field, stuck it in the trade card, and there you have a super rich experience. And this goes back to the original point I made about the red circles, the small details that when people discover them, like, whoa, that's cool, I'm going to show my friends, or I'm going to look for other things like maybe the hidden coin from the coin toss that I put in one of the trade cards here. There are 2,000 of them. One of them may or may not have it. Another thing, or another new design problem that you have for deep zoom is information importance. I was working with some people, some external people to Microsoft who are making a collection, and they were talking about how they're having a hard time fitting everything into the trade card. And I just told them to make it smaller because you can zoom into it. And so this is really interesting because I used to do a lot of web design. And I mean, web design, you're sort of designing at 100% all the time. You have this assumption that the web page is just going to be scrolled, and well, if it doesn't fit, you just got to make it fit. And that's how things get really tall and scrollable. But what Deep Zoom is offering us is this new way of designing that is much more like designing for print or a magazine. So if I have a magazine, I hold it far, and I can see the top level stuff. I hold it closer, and then I can see the legal fine print on the cigarette ads. It's the same story here. So the important things in this design were the cute monkey, the population decline of it, and its name. And secondary was the map. However, you can still zoom in and get the full map. This is what Deep Zoom is all about. And we were talking about this a bit earlier today. There's a question about it. What about size-based visuals, where when it's small, it's one thing, and when it's large, it's the other? I say 3.x in the title because I don't know when we're going to release this. If we do, However, we are looking at this right now. We're investigating how this works, what kind of opportunities it affords. Personally, I find it pretty useful that items can go from a yellow spot up into the full detailed trade card. Now, as we briefly mentioned on the earlier morning talks, you can actually pull this off today if you want to. It's a bit of a hack, but I always say if it's a stupid solution and it works, it's not a stupid solution. So what you can do is you can create one image pyramid of the detailed trade card and another image pyramid of the small trade card, and put the top cone of one pyramid on the other cone of the other pyramid. I haven't actually done this myself because it's a pretty beefy procedure, I think, or at least without code it is. But if you want to experiment, you should be able to pull this off. So number 4, now that we know how a trade card could look or should look, let's talk about creating them. As I mentioned, the NFL collection had something like 2,000 players in it. Baseball had the same amount. We had lots and lots of trade cards that we had to make. And these trade cards were typically 3,000 by 4,000 pixels each. We had over 15,000, I think, and they were all made with Photoshop, not one by one. But before I go into Photoshop, I'll tell you about PAuthor, because I found it to be very, very useful. Andrew talked about it this morning. This is the one where you use HTML templates to create your images. So you feed it an Excel spreadsheet or a comma-separated field file or CXML itself. You combine that with an HTML template, and you have batch processing. I've played with it with JavaScript, and I've been able to toggle the visibility of certain elements on the card, change the fill, change the CSS style. It's super powerful, and it's really quick. The other approach is using Photoshop datasets. Now, the reason we used this was because we didn't have the time or the resources to use the dev-assisted method. PAuthor didn't exist back in November and October when we were creating the collections. So it was important that the UX team owned the collection design and production process end to end. So just to gauge the audience, who here uses Photoshop or manages or is responsible for people who use Photoshop? Okay, so fair amount. It can be a pretty handy tool, and it might save you some time if you're not using PAuthor. You feed Photoshop a tab delimited file, you give it a template, and you batch process things. Things you can do with this datasets feature is toggle layer visibility. You can insert images, and you can also replace text. Now, the interesting thing about the toggle layer or group visibility is that includes toggling the visibility of adjustment layers. So if you have an adjustment layer that tweaks the contrast and the saturation of something, you can programmatically do that via Photoshop and datasets. This feature lives in the Image Variables Define menu. I won't go into more detail on how to actually implement this, but it's reasonably documented in Adobe's help files, which are linked in this presentation. Comparing the two, PAuthor is very fast. Love it. Great job, Andrew. The awesome thing is the pyramids, the image pyramids, deep zoom pyramids, are created at the same time as the rest of the images. So you can batch create images, batch create pyramid. It produces the CXML if you don't already have it, which is a big win. And it supports 3 data input formats, another big win. And if you're familiar with CSS, HTML, JavaScript, there's your design language right there. The advantage to Photoshop is you have more visual effects. So if you want a really interesting glow, drop shadow, outline effect applied to images as you load them in, you can do that with Photoshop. I've had better luck with deep zoom images using the Photoshop method. I had to batch produce, I think it was 150 trade cards that were 6,000 by 8,000 pixels. They're epic. I use Photoshop for that. And maybe your design team only uses Photoshop. There's an option. So that's batch production. And then finally, iteration. Iteration is the hard part, but it's the rewarding part, because you'll always find something that can be improved. The collection that we used the least amount of iterations and changes for was the dog breeds collection. That took us 7 tries to get it right before we had decided on, okay, we should use these facet categories. No, the dogs should look like this. These pieces of information are important. For our Major League Baseball collection, that took us 27 tries before we got it right, just because there are data flaws, there are image flaws, you think something is going to work and it doesn't. Like any good design process, iteration and feedback are key. Also, getting a lot of critique and feedback from your peers is good. You make a design, float it to them, get some thick skin, get their comments and feedback, or even better, put it in front of users and get their feedback, and let this inform how you iterate and change and make the right decisions on how to design something. So those are the 5 major things for building a good collection or designing a good collection. Knowing your goals and audience, treating your content appropriately, designing for this big, and this big, automating your production, and iterating. The last thing that we'll go through are some case studies. So these are some of the things that we've been working on in the lab in the past, past couple weeks. And what I'm going to just show here is some designs and try to explain how they map to some of the things that I've just told you about. So we mentioned earlier today about Fourth Coffee. Fourth Coffee is a fictional coffee company. If you go to fourthcoffee.com, you'll go to microsoft.com. And this was actually a collection for business intelligence. Now, the first reaction to this is, that's really rich for business intelligence. And yes, it is. And why shouldn't it be? One of the things that they said about Office 2007 when they gave it that redesign was people spend more time with Office than they do with their loved ones. And so why shouldn't it be beautiful? Why shouldn't you put care and attention to emotional design in these things? People are people too, regardless of whether they're using spreadsheets or PowerPoint or business intelligence or cubes or SQL Server. Make it beautiful, make it fun. Now, of course, that depends on how much graphic design talent you have available. But if you have brands, you have brand assets. You can use them. You can create a compelling experience. And I don't have the data on this, but I would wager that if you create a super compelling business intelligence experience, you're going to have more people who are interested in the business intelligence. And the principles that apply to customers who want to stay stuck on your website, well, that can work internally as well. Your coworkers still count as customers. So that's a wordy way of saying what we just tried to do with this. But other things that we did with this were apply different wood tones according to the store type. The goal in this collection was make obvious the store type. So it may not seem obvious here, but when it's in mass, it can be discerned. Another thing that we did was make obvious the sales. Yes, it's 4.5%, but you have the big chalk arrow. And taking elements like the chalk, the wood, the store logo, maybe this is actually the same stickers that they put on the cups of coffee. Taking those elements and putting them into the BI stuff helps reinforce your brand internally and gets everyone reminded of what exactly you are creating as a company. Something that I do here is I call these size checks. When you're designing for deep zoom, tiny to large, you have to understand how your design will look at all different kinds of scales. So this is a good way for us to test how how the design will turn out. And originally, I thought that the wood tone and the chalkboard color would come out quite prominently. And they did, but I was surprised by how much the map actually becomes the dominant element. And so because of that, I'm reapproaching the way we designed this card. Size checks are super handy. Another thing that we're looking at right now is the heterogeneous news collection. So news from Twitter, print media, online articles, blogs, and videos all in one collection. And again, we did a size check to see how would this look in the end experience. And we've made adjustments accordingly to this. It's great to model it, how it will end up in front of your customers. And again, taking things that are familiar with the medium. So Twitter, obviously use the Twitter colors. You take the themes from Twitter. Blogs, we use the orange for the RSS theme, things like that. The sticker, the sticky, the blog label. And then same across the other media types, taking what's appropriate. The other thing about these is we use the HTML template. And just to show you, I mean, you can do a lot with HTML. I don't have the right fonts installed on this machine, but they look good. Same deal here. It looks really bloggy. And this is just using HTML and some images. And then another example is Wikipedia. And this is very different than the ones previously shown. It's a very watered down, plain design. Going back to the theme of what's appropriate, in this case, we had 27 categories. We broke that rule I said earlier about colors mapped to categories. We had 27 colors, so that's okay. But yeah, sometimes a simple design is all you need too. In this case, it had to be simple because we weren't going to make a deep zoom experience out of 2.9 million Wikipedia articles. We just needed to give you the experience. And in this case, the major experience was in the data and the filters and the facets and the themes themselves. And so if there's two things that I want everyone to go away with here is knowing your goals and knowing your audience, because those are the things that will tell you what to design right. And so just what we covered why design matters, how to make a great collection, and just a couple case studies.